Hello, and welcome to Glory Be. Interesting people and how they pray.
Each week, we chat with interesting people about their lives, their work, and how they pray. I'm Sharon Hanish.
And I'm Father Vince Fernandez, and we're joined by our producer, Mike Malcolm. Our guest this week is Monsignor Dennis Dorney. He was ordained a priest in 1967. He's currently the pastor emeritus at the Church of St. Mary. He grew up in Oklahoma City, and he graduated from Bishop McGinnis High School. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Cardinal Glennon College in St. Louis, and a licentiate in Theology from the Gregorian University in Rome. He also studied canon law at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and he served on the Marriage Tribunal as chancellor of the diocese, as also vocation director for the diocese, vicar general, and had been on many boards, including St. John Hospital and Catholic Charities. Welcome, Monsignor. It's good to have you as a guest.
Good to be here. Thank you.
How's life treating you as a retired priest? I'm sure you're extremely busy.
It's terrible. It is. No, it's delightful, actually. It's nice to have lots to do when you want to do it, but you can sort of schedule things yourself more than you can if you just have to run by the parish calendar. So it's been nice. That's good.
How was the pandemic for you? You're very much a social butterfly, so I'm sure that was difficult.
Well, it came right on too after I'd had one of my hips replaced, and so I was sort of in the house for several months. But once I started driving, I would just get out and drive around, and I didn't. It wasn't overwhelming at all, but everybody was worried about that. They said, "What is he doing?" But there were people coming to the house often, and I was over here quite often, as you know, in the office. So it wasn't bad at all.
That's good. Good.
So, Monsignor Dorney, you were one of the very first priests that I met, actually, when I came to Tulsa. I was working with Father Tim Davison, but you were the vocation director at the time.
Yes.
But what about your vocation? When did you always want to be a priest? Did you think of consider any other careers? When did you decide you wanted to go to the seminary? Talk about your vocation.
I think it was probably junior year in high school, and the associate pastors at Christ the King in Oklahoma City were very instrumental in my life. And we also had this group, YCS, Young Christian Students, and we met in people's homes, and I was very involved in that. And just gradually, then I talked to Father Jones and made that decision, and just went there. But I tried to go to daily Mass even when I was at McGinnis, and it was fine. It just sort of came to me. And, of course, there were several other people in my class that went to the seminary, and there were several young ladies that went to the convent. So it was a little different times than maybe perhaps now.
So were you were in seminary during Vatican II, right? Or had it already...
I was in Rome for the last two sessions of the Vatican Council. So I was in Cardinal Glennon for the first part. Yeah.
Okay.
What was it like being in Rome for the Vatican Council? I'm sure that was just...
Well, it just turned Rome upside down.
Right.
And there was a group of us that went each day after the council closed over to a building and put out the minutes of the day and did that, and just had a great time doing it. And we got in on a couple of the sessions sort of in the back of the church. And it was, and all the bishops were there, and lots of them were living in our college. And we had more speakers coming in all the time in the evenings that were there with bishops and all, and it was just delightful. It was delightful, and lots of parties with all the bishops there. So it was great. It was just it just made those last 2 years very exciting.
Wow, that is super cool. Like, did you have any professors that were, advising the Vatican? I mean, how did that work?
No, I think each bishop brought whomever they wanted. None of our, to my recollection, none of our faculty at the university were over at the council at the same time, because they were teaching, of course, among other things.
So were you thinking it would be a good idea to say the Mass in English and to turn the altar around? Or
Yes. In fact, I was ordained in 1967 in December, and the beginning of Advent in that year is when the Mass could go into the vernacular. So we really never had to study saying Mass in Latin. We didn't have to go through a trial and all that because they knew it was going to change. So that was exciting for us too.
Yes.
Makes it a lot easier too going through school. And I remember you telling me too, because I also went to the North American College, but you had kind of a more difficult experience because you could only call home once a year, right, or something like that, or you can call home at all.
I called home once for my parents' 25th anniversary.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because you had to register the cable, and it cost back then it was like $25 a minute or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
So we started talking about the weather, and I said, "Mother, why don't you just send a letter and I'll send mine? Because you're going to take my dinner money away."
Yes. That is so funny.
But yeah, there was only one phone at the hall, the end of the hall.
Oh my gosh, crazy.
Well, I even remember when Father Jack was there because I had to call him for some reason in Rome, and I called, and it took them a while to find him. So even then, there were no cell phones. Father Vince doesn't know about that, Monsignor.
My life is very easy.
Your life was an easy Rome experience. You know, Monsignor, I think you're super interesting, and you've done so much as a priest in your career. You've been the vicar general, the chancellor, vocations director. You've served on the marriage tribunal. Can you tell, our listeners may not even know what some of these things are. Like, what does the vicar general do, and what does a chancellor of the diocese do? Was there a particular position you enjoyed the most? I think of you as having sort of this gift of organization and an ability to, if you hadn't been a priest, you probably would have been a CEO of some big company because you're just savvy in that way. But what did you do? What are these positions? Talk about that.
Well, it depends a lot upon the diocese and the size of the diocese and all that. Our chancery, by compared to other larger diocese or archdiocese, is very small. But the chancellor usually was like the bishop's secretary, and not the one that did the typing, but I mean handled some of the mail and all that kind of stuff. But it differs in different dioceses. It's whatever the bishop wants the chancellor to do. Whereas, in canon law, he's a notary. But whereas a vicar general has the same authority as the bishop does, or whatever the bishop wants to place him over. And if the bishop is gone, then you're sort of in charge. And then I ended up on every board in the diocese and the hospital and a few other things. But I just enjoyed that.
Do you get assigned to boards, or do they invite you? So how did you get involved with St. John's Hospital?
Sister Therese called and said, "We'd like you to be on the board."
And what did you do on that board?
Listened.
You weren't the moral Catholic voice.
No, but we could speak up. But at the hospital, most of the work was done in committees, and the board meetings were like letting everybody know what had been decided, and then we could discuss that if we wanted. And sometimes if there was a vote, then we would vote on that, and I was a voting member as well. And I served 12 years on that, and that's all I could serve. So I thought, good, it's over. And the next day I got a letter from Sister Therese, and she appointed me to the health care board, not the hospital board. And so I said, "How many terms do I get?" She said, "Well, you're representing the bishop. You can stay as long as you want, or as long as we want you to stay." So that was another 10 years or something.
So you weren't or were you involved in bioethics, ethical decisions?
I was on the ethics committee, yes, and for 1 year I chaired it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you help make tricky decisions what did you do?
Well, we were always very getting reports on how the hospital was living up to the law of the church on these things. But if there was a special case, the people that were more involved in that was the nursing staff and the physicians. And if there was a moral issue involved, then that was something different. But at St. John's, there never really was.
Okay.
And at least during my time.
Okay, that's great. Oh, that's good. And then you served, I mean, you've done so much. So Catholic Charities, you were on the board there.
I was on the board there ex officio from the very first board when it was first created, because I was the chancellor at that time. And then I was the vicar general, so I was on it. And then after I retired in that way, I asked Bishop Slattery if I could continue, because we were working on Porticelli. So he appointed me, and then when Bishop Connolly, I think at Deacon Kevin's request, gave me a 3-year term, but it'll end the end of December, and I can't serve any longer. So
Porticelli, for people who are listening who don't know maybe what that is, can you tell them what that is? And
sure.
And you're even a volunteer there, right?
I was until the virus came.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, let me back up and say that we ran a home for many years, St. Joseph Residence, and it was a place where people had AIDS and most people that came there to die, until the pharmacy people got all these pills together and so it gradually, the need for it began to diminish, because people weren't coming there to die, they were coming there to get their medications all right. And so we ran it for 6 months with only one person in it. And then the board decided that we should this particular ministry we've done it. And at the time we had this, we were the only place in Oklahoma that we knew of that would take HIV positive people. The hospitals didn't want them, the nursing homes didn't want them. So we were really, nobody had to pay to stay there. It was all, we did that. So then the question came up at the board, well, what shall we do now? And I said, I think we ought to build a hospice house. And in the city of Tulsa, there's been one running for a long time, Clare House. And so the lady that is responsible for that helped us and was on our board and opened up all of her personnel things to show us how they were running it. And some of our board members even volunteered over there to get a sense of it. So we decided we were going to do it, and we had the architects come in and all that, and we were able to raise the money from 70 different foundations and people to build it. And if anybody's been out there, the thing that we just really were very adamant about is we wanted it to look more like a home than anything. So if you go into nursing homes, and this looks like you're walking into a strange home in many regards. And the maximum that we can take, well, first of all, let me back up. The way you get in there, it doesn't have anything to do with your financial wherewithal or your race or what you are religiously. It all depends upon if the people that are working with you in hospice now tell us that you have less than maybe 30 days to live, then the hospice people make the request for the entrance there and not the families. But the families have to be part of it. So the average stay over the years before someone would die there is about 7 days. And some have been there 30. But it's just a home for the dying. And it's not, the medical part of it is run by hospice, not by us. Our staff only carries out the whatever hospice wants us to do. So none of our people can change medications or do anything without calling the hospice people. And then we tried to have it, and this was before the virus, we also had a dining room, and people from around the town really brought meals in for lunch and for dinner for the staff that was there and for any members of the families visiting there, and they knew that there were meals for them all the time. But we had to stop that with the virus. And so it's changed quite a bit, but I think it's going to move the other direction a little bit again, too.
So are there still patients that come and to die there even though the virus is going on?
Yes.
So it is still...
But they had... Yes. Although we cut down the number of people we were taking because there's 12 guest rooms, and in between each two there's a restroom. And so the staff decided that they didn't want people from this room going into the same restroom as the people from this room. So what we did was open the other room to the families so that they could spend the night there if they wanted to, and they had a place for privacy. And also, it kept them together rather than in our living rooms around the building because of this, spacing. And so they stayed with the people that they're with. But you can no longer just walk through the door, and there's only so many can be there at one time. Whereas before, you could have 10, 12 people out visiting, and it was not unusual at all. So, but the reason that I think it's marvelous is that Cardinal Bernardine, who was in Chicago, the Archbishop of Chicago, when he talked about pro-life, he said pro-life is like a seamless garment. In other words, pro-life involves, pregnancy all the way around. And so now we completed the circle, and now we are there to care for the dying. And all the other things that Charities does in between reaches to people in their needs in other times. And it's a hard sell yet, even to some of the Catholic communities. But I remember when we first, after Roe v. Wade, then the next thing that was coming along was capital punishment, and that was one of the issues. And a lot of people didn't see the relationship between anti-abortion or right to life with the killing. And now the popes are saying that it's almost unusual, very unusual that we'd have to do that to someone to keep the society from being injured by them. So, and euthanasia is another one that's coming along. So all those things are part of this seamless garment. And you can't just take one out and throw it away and say you're pro-life.
Right, yeah. It all goes back to, the dignity of the human person.
That's right.
And so,
yeah.
And Porticelli, it really is it's a beautiful place. I just remember I went on a tour there, and there's a nice garden in the back, and the rooms are, beautiful. And the fact that they're, in kind of its peak, right, pre-COVID, it was a community, right?
Yes.
The people felt, everyone I talked to that's had family members go through there, they really felt taken care of and loved and respected, right? That's once again, the dignity of the human person, right? Yeah. To die with dignity, right? They're not just in a hospital bed, all,
Right. And when I was volunteering there, I would sit and I was in the lobby, and a lot of the family would come out and talk, and they say, "Why are you all doing this?"
Right, yeah.
And I said, "Because we believe in the sanctity of life from conception to natural death." They said, "It is just marvelous. We just can't believe it." And then twice a year, we had a gathering of anybody who wanted to come in on a Saturday, sort of for a prayer service that had people die. And then they would get up and say what they thought about it, and it was just absolutely fantastic to see how grateful they were to the people for having that kind of ministry.
Well, and it's almost having had St. Joseph's residence, I volunteered there I'm dating myself now, right? So 30 years ago when we had people. But I remember sitting with a guy who was dying, and he said the same thing, why are you doing this? And the dignity of the human person, all I was doing was washing dishes and serving some meals, so it was, but I love how I'm grateful that that's not necessary anymore.
Certainly. And
that now we've transitioned to a very similar space, mission, which is to be with the dying, you know.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I know you were a big part of that, so thank you, Monsignor.
I just really believe in it, because if you visit nursing homes, like I've done all my life and all that, and I know most of them are for profit, and some that aren't just can't really provide everything that everybody wants. But it's just so important that people are cared for as they die. And families just don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right about that.
Yeah. So.
Well, we have talked to you about how interesting you are and what you've been involved in and what you've done. But the other part of our podcast is how you pray.
Uh-huh.
So I know you're a priest, and I know there are certain things that priests have to do every day, ways that you pray with. But tell us about your daily prayer. What draws your heart?
Well, part of it is, my obligations as a priest to the divine office. And I am a morning person, or I was more of a morning person than I am now. And so I always try to do most of my prayers before Mass, and I usually had the 6:30 Mass. So I'd get up about 4:45 and pray. I haven't done that recently, I must confess. But being retired, I have the ability to use the divine office more like it's supposed to be at certain times of the day, rather than just sitting down and going through all of the hours of the day at one time. I never leave it until night, because I easily fall asleep in those things, and my guardian angel got tired of trying to finish them for me. So, and that's it. But I think in many ways, one of the things that I think is prayerful for me is the sacrament of reconciliation, in the sense that there's a relation. You just have to believe sometimes when you hear what you've told people, that the Spirit was there. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't necessarily think these things. And so it's something that I treasure being able to do. And of course, the Eucharist is just amazing. The other thing, praying, I pray with people that are dying, when we go to anoint them. So prayer is just a part of every day. There's the only structures in it are the sacraments and the breviary. But all the other opportunities that you have to pray with people who are dying and all these things, it's an honor. It's not just a job. It's an honor to be able to be close to people like that, I think. And at St. Mary's, we've really tried hard to be able to do that. But of course, again, the virus kept us from visiting people in homes until the vaccines came along, because the thought that you might be carrying that and not even knowing it, and going into a house where the people had been locked up forever and bring the virus in, I said, I can't do that. But now there's more freedom to do it. But so I'm not, when we had our Advent Day of Prayer together, the vice rector of Kenrick came and gave a couple talks about how they're building the spirituality of seminarians today. And I'm envious, truthfully, because even in studying Scripture, the Scriptures and a lot of stuff was more like a history book than a prayer book. And we were never really taught that. And again, I'm envious of that, because I see what the young people, the young priest, the formations that they're receiving is nothing like we received. So I'm sure that the prayer will be much richer in many regards. Sister Barbara Austin at St. Joseph's Monastery keeps telling me I should do Lectio Divina, and I said, I can't sit that long and bring stuff in anymore. I'm just going to, at this point, I'm just going to try and keep doing what I've been doing and not change my whole methodology.
And it's been good. I mean, you've been, like one of the priests I really look up to in the diocese. 54 years a priest, is that right? Or
53.
53 years a priest, which is incredible. And I think, you're absolutely right. In my long 3 years as a priest, that privilege of praying with people, right, in those intimate moments of when they're dying or in the hospital or in their homes, things like that.
Yeah.
I had a question, though, about, in the beginning you mentioned the divine office, right? And so you've been praying it for 53 years.
No longer as a deacon.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what we had. That's basically what we did in the seminary.
Right.
Right.
How did you, because it is, it's a 4-week Psalter, right, of the same Psalms over and over again, and a few feast days in there. And even for me, in my, once again, 3 long years as a priest, it's like, oh man, I got to do this again. I love praying the breviary, but there's some days you're like, just want to go to sleep. I got to pray night prayer, things like that. So how did you, I guess maybe in your years, decades really of praying this, how has that changed at all in terms of your love for the breviary? Were there kind of ups and downs with that, or is it kind of a steady?
Yes. There's always a struggle to not just make it mechanical.
Right.
and to slow down. Like, for example, I'm one of the 2 chaplains for the nuns at St. Joseph's Monastery. And the way they pray is the way that we should pray.
Right.
And the way that we pray when we get together as a group of priests, it sounds most of the time like we've never said this before.
Right.
But there's a certain rhythm to this in the Benedict, and going to visit the seminaries. I told them one time, they asked, there was something coming out, and I forget what it was, and the bishop asked me to make some comments about it, about the seminaries and teaching prayer. I said, well, everything that we do, and this was certainly true, was in groups. And I said, when we go home in Oklahoma, you can be the only priest for miles and miles and miles and miles. So we've got to develop a personal relationship with this. Well, my suggestion didn't go very far. But, it's just, I made the mistake, quotes unquotes, of taking speed reading courses in college. And I can go through novels like nothing. Father Jack but it's terrible when you're praying.
Right.
In fact, I sometimes just stop and say, wait a minute. Let's go back and do that again,
Yeah, that's not supposed to be speed reading, I don't think.
No. And the other thing that I rediscovered in life, really, it really started when I was made the pastor at Immaculate Conception. From then on, I said, well, I've got to say the rosary every day. And so I do that as part of the prayer. And again, I have to keep telling myself, slow down.
Slow down. That's good advice. Yeah. Something that we ask everyone, and I like the advice, you slow down. That's going to be what I remember from this interview. But anyway, has there been a time in your life when it's been difficult to pray?
I think the only time that was true, I had a whole series of different surgeries over the years. And, after that, I don't know if you're just not there. In fact, I asked my doctor one time, I said, what's going on? I can't even read a novel. But it's when you don't feel well, and you're not thinking well, and you're maybe taking this medicine or that, it's really hard to pray. Mm-hmm. For me. For other people, that might not be true, but that's always been true for me.
No, I agree with that. I think of people, I had an uncle who suffered with MS for many, many years, and the pains, and I thought, how does he do it? Because it can become overwhelming. It's hard to focus and pray when you're in physical suffering. Well, it's been a great interview, and we so appreciate you being here. So that we always ask our guests if they had one thing that they could ask all of our listeners to pray for. What would that be? What would you want all the thousands and thousands of our listeners?
Well, truthfully, I'm sort of preoccupied with it. That those who are leaders in the world might learn how to work together for the common good of all peoples, so that everybody could live a dignified human life. And I know that's going to take more miracles than maybe God's going to throw at us, but it has to happen. We cannot continue on like this. And that means that we have to do enough reading of good things to see what's going on and be aware of what's happening in the world, and just not think that the whole world is just like the news shows, because there's so many good things happening too. But you never hear about that much. But that's what I would like people to pray for. So that it goes back to the pro-life thing, I think, in my life. And I sometimes feel guilty that how well we live, and then I look and I see, and I say, Lord, help us. What can we do? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I love that. Thank you so much. So, we're called Glory Be, interesting people and how they pray. Will you close us out by leading us in the Glory Be?
Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was
in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. And thank you for inviting me to do this.
Thank you so much. It was
I
great.
like to talk.
Glory Be is a production of the Office of Communications at the Church of St. Mary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your producer, Mike Malcolm. See you next time.